A common question people ask when buying a property is whether they should buy a house or a flat. On one side, you might think that buying a house is the best option because it means you will have an asset that will increase in value over time. But on the other side, you might think that buying a flat is a better option because it's cheaper and means you can get on the property ladder quicker. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the financial implications of buying a house versus a flat, the key things you need to consider before buying, and finally, the non-financial factors to take into consideration, both if you're looking to buy for yourself or if you're looking to buy as an investment. I'll also cover the one thing that I always look for when buying a property, regardless of whether it's a flat or a house. If you're new here, I'm Nischa. I'm a qualified accountant, and this is part of a series of real estate videos on my channel. Let's start with what is the difference. If you're buying a house, it's typically going to be a freehold, which means you own the house and you also own the ground or the land on which that house sits forever, or at least until you decide to sell the house. If you're buying a flat, it's most likely a leasehold. So if you buy a leasehold flat, you own that flat, but someone else owns the ground or the land on which that building of flats sits on. And that person or that company is the freeholder. Then there's also share of freehold, which is a blend of the two. So you still own a lease of your flat, but you also own a share of the ground alongside other people in the building. So if there are 5 flats in this block, you'll own the lease on your flat, but also you'll own 20% of the share of the ground alongside the other flat owners. This isn't as common as freehold and leasehold, so to keep things simple in this video, I'm not going to go into this option. Now let's look at what you need to consider if you're buying this as an investment and you want to make money on it. People tend to go for flats over houses as they're generally cheaper, and so subsequently, the gross yield seems higher. By gross yield, I mean your profit before taking into account all the expenses and the costs. The issue here is that the gross yield can be a bit deceiving when it comes to flats because the ongoing costs of owning a leasehold flat are higher. There are 2 costs that come with almost all leasehold flats, and the first is ground rent. Remember we said as a leasehold owner, you own the flat for a specific period of time and the freeholder owns the ground that the flat sits on. That essentially means you're the tenant and you have to pay ground rent to the freeholder. Ground rent used to be really cheap. It used to be nominal, but recently it has become quite expensive. For my flat in London, I pay £400 a year, and then that amount is reviewed and adjusted according to the lease every 15 years. So you want to check in your lease what you'll be paying for ground rent beforehand because this can really add up. The second cost to take into account with a leasehold flat is the service charge, and this can be painful. When you own a house, all the maintenance such as the repairs on a roof or maintaining the garden, that is your responsibility as the freeholder. You can find your own contractors, you can get the cheapest contractors, you can arrange everything yourself, and you have full control over the entire process and whether or not you even want to get that thing fixed or you want to leave it broken. When you have a flat, you are responsible for the inside of the flat, but all the communal areas are the freeholder's responsibility. So this includes the corridors, the lifts, the stairway, the lobby, communal gardens, parking spaces. So anything that happens to those areas, the freeholder will sort that out and arrange, but they will charge you as a leaseholder a service charge for doing so because they are doing it for the entire building, and because they're doing it on a larger scale, this tends to be more expensive and is out of your control how cheap you could get it for. Again, this really adds up. For example, the lift in my building has broken multiple times and lift repairs cost tens of thousands of pounds. So the freeholder then pays for that upfront but passes that cost onto each of the leaseholders or each of the flat owners in the building. Those are the 2 main hidden costs that need to be taken into account, both if you're buying the place to live in yourself, so you want to make sure you've budgeted for those costs, and also if you're looking to buy this as an investment property, because you want to make sure you're taking those costs into your calculations to decide whether or not this makes sense in terms of a return perspective. While a flat can be cheaper to buy, a freehold house is often cheaper to maintain than a flat with a service charge. Something else you want to consider is the ownership period. For a freehold house, you own it forever. You do not need to hand it over to anyone after any specific period of time. It's yours until you decide to sell it. With a lease, this is yours for a specific period of time. It can be 100 years or 125 years, as we discussed. This does not usually impact the value of your property at the start. But if that lease term or the number of years left on the lease goes below 70 years, it's hard to then get a mortgage on it. So if you're looking to sell it, that will impact who can buy your place, and consequently, it will impact the property's value and the amount of money you can get for it. Now, you can pay the freeholder to extend this lease on your flat, but you must have lived in the property for a certain period of time to exercise that right. And it's likely you'll have to pay the freeholder to extend the lease. So again, this is something else you want to consider into all your calculations. There is something called a virtual freehold for flats, and that's a 999-year lease. So this doesn't have any ownership issues per se. I mean, you're not going to live past 999 years. It's not an issue that you have to worry about in your lifetime, but at the end of the day, it is still a leasehold. So the ground rent and the service charge do still apply. The third thing you want to consider is alterations. Whether you're buying a house or a flat, you do want it to increase in value over time. Generally, the prices in most big cities increase over time, but you can also accelerate that increase in value by making alterations. So adding floor space, redoing it up, improving it. This can all increase the value of your property. And if you own a freehold house, this is easier to do. You may, depending on what you're doing, need approval from the local council, but you have more freedom to make changes and add value to your property. With a leasehold flat, you need permission from the local council, but you also need permission from the freeholder to make any alterations. And that just adds another layer of complexity. For example, if you want to convert a 1-bedroom flat into a 2-bedroom flat, you need approval from the freeholder. And again, they may ask you to pay a lump sum in return for their consent. So the lease of a leasehold flat also stops you from doing certain things with the place. So for example, with my flat, my lease with the freeholder stops me from renting it out on Airbnb. Whereas with a freehold house, that's not an issue. You have full control over almost everything that you want to do. Okay, now let's move on to the non-money related things to consider. And the one thing that I always look for. But before we get into that, if you're buying this place as somewhere for you to live and you don't really care about any income or any capital appreciation or how much the place goes up in value, and it's not really an asset or an investment for you, then it really doesn't matter. Forget about everything and just go buy something that you like and that makes you happy. Secondly, if you just want the peace of mind of owning a place rather than renting, then as flats are generally cheaper, you can get on the property ladder quicker. You do want to take into account all the costs of the maintenance though, and make sure you've accounted for that within your budget. And also this whole buy versus rent debate, that's another topic altogether. I have a whole dedicated video on that, which I'll link up here if you're toying between the two and which one you want to go for. And thirdly, I wanted to add this tip in because I always make sure I look for this before I buy somewhere. And that is to make sure that the place that I'm buying has a south-facing garden or a south-facing balcony. As the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, the south side of many houses will see most hours of sunlight during the day. So that's really important if you're looking for somewhere to live for yourself. The more sun, the better, in my opinion. I don't create as many real estate/property videos as I used to because I'm not sure they resonate with as many of you. But if you do want me to make more of these, then let me know in the comments and I'll release the other ones that I have planned on home ownership. Thank you for watching. I'll leave you with some other property videos that you may find useful and I'll leave them over here.